Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our TED Talk, AI Alone Won't Save Data Quality, Lessons from the Financial Markets.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here at SampleCon. And I'm here to talk about how I think AI alone won't save or solve our data quality problems, and to speak about some lessons from financial markets. First, a little bit briefly about myself. This is a picture of me here visiting the gravesite in Edinburgh, Scotland, of Adam Smith. And so I'm here to talk to you today literally about some old dead economists and some of their ideas and how I think it might be relevant to your industry. I am an outsider. My training is in economics and finance all the way up, but I hope that I'll have something to say that's of interest to you all. I teach and do research in fintech at Utah State University, and I'm involved with something called the Analytics Solution Center. I'm here with my colleague Mark Dotson, who is in marketing, has a PhD in marketing, so he's bona fide. And what we do is we lead student teams of data analysts on real-world projects. So hit us up if you want some high-quality but low-price data analytics from students. As I mentioned, I'm here to talk to you about old dead economists and their ideas. So I'm going to start with a quote from one of my favorites, F.A. Hayek. And I love this quote because it is a guide to us sometimes to reset and just think naively about some questions. And so that's what I'm here to do, is just naively as an outsider, but with some expertise in economics, to think about things freshly. And I want to introduce you to this gentleman. This is Michael Jordan. And I think he's the real GOAT, but of data science. He's a professor of both computer science and statistics at Cal Berkeley. And if you're in the data science world, you know something about Michael Jordan. If you don't, let me introduce you. Back in 2019, he wrote a really provocative paper in the Harvard Data Science Review that's since become a little bit infamous. And his argument in that paper is, let's pump the brake on the hype surrounding AI. And that perhaps strong AI is not what's really going on. And that's too amenable to the hype machine. But instead, perhaps we should focus on some other acronyms besides AI, like IA, which he terms intelligence augmentation, and II, which would be intelligent infrastructure. So rather than a scientific or engineering discipline that is trying to recreate human intelligence, what we're actually doing is witnessing the emergence of a new engineering discipline. But in the history of engineering disciplines, it's totally unique because it's a human engineering discipline that's about human decision-making and coordination at scale, augmented by technologies. And everyone, I think, wouldn't be surprised to think that this new discipline is founded upon computer science and statistics. Jordan thinks that most of AI is really machine learning, and for him, as for me, machine learning is really applied statistics. But what he adds to this is that we need economics as part of this founding theory to guide this new engineering discipline. I couldn't agree more with his perspective, and so that's what I'm here to talk about, is perhaps this perspective can be helpful in data quality issues. I won't read this whole quote from him, but this is a quote from the paper, so I just want to read a little bit from the end here. We have a real opportunity to conceive of something historically new, a human-centric engineering discipline. So the next question then, if you can buy Jordan's perspective on this new emerging engineering discipline, is what kind of economics do we need to found that theory? And I'm going to introduce you, if you haven't already met these two. These are F.A. Hayek and James Buchanan, both Nobel Prize winners in economics. And I'm here to introduce you to a new word of Greek derivative, and that's this word catalactics. It's a different perspective that their scholarship brought from the mainstream of economics. And so I want to introduce you to this term. And when you think of catalactics, I want you to think of economics as a humane science, but a science nonetheless. And what it means in its original Greek is the science of exchange and about exchange relationships. But it also has these beautiful connotations of admitting into the community and turning an enemy into a friend. And its focus is really on the evolution and historical development of institutions to try to cope with knowledge and coordination problems. And so if you're thinking about how this perspective might differ from a college course you took in economics, I want you to think about the exchange paradigm versus the allocationist paradigm, which you probably learned about. And I think that's going to bring some insights that might be helpful. And so I am an academic, and I'm going to present some academic work, but I'm going to try to tell it as a story and not be nerdy and get into the weeds here. But this was a crucial paper from 1937, and it's been termed Hayek's transformation, when he moved from just a mainstream economist to someone really advocating this catalactic perspective. And what he addresses in this paper are what have since become known as knowledge and coordination problems. For Hayek, knowledge is local, tacit, and distributed, whereas in the mainstream theory, everyone knows everything and it's fully global. But that's obviously not true. That's a counterfactual point to theory, and he says we need to start with that. And I think economists have been ignoring this paper for far too long. But he really just addresses the questions and outlines them here. Knowledge and coordination problems. It's foundational work. If you have heard of F.A. Hayek, it's probably because of this paper right here. It's one of the most highly cited papers in all of economics. Thousands and dozens of thousands of citations in the literature. He won the Nobel Prize in 1974. In this paper, he gives a partial answer to his question about how knowledge is communicated and discovered, and how many various millions and billions of different plans are coordinated. And his answer is the price mechanism. Prices act as knowledge surrogates to convey and receive information and knowledge. But for the purposes here, what I want to point out is that his answer was institutional. That the price mechanism is a special case of an institution as a nodal point for communicating knowledge, aggregating knowledge, and coordinating different plans. Next, I'm going to talk about this foundational paper from James Buchanan. And what Buchanan wants us to think about, also from this catalactic perspective, is how much the design of institutions really matter. And I think for data quality, we can learn quite a lot about this. We need to think deeply about the kind of governance structures and procedures that can be helpful. AI and other technologies exist within an institutional framework and can't alone automatically and sort of magically solve our problems. In the paper, he brilliantly outlines a theory of clubs. You've heard of private goods and public goods, and what he pointed out is that there's really a continuum, and there's a kind of good that's intermediate between these kinds of things. And so shout out to Data Quality Co-op. Perhaps they're really onto something here with their kind of organization. It's deeply rooted in this Buchanan kind of thinking. So with that as background, I want to talk about some really fascinating history that I share with my students to help them think about institutions. And maybe not well known, but I think powerful example of club goods is the modern futures exchange. A futures exchange is a club. In order to trade on that platform, you have to be a member of the cooperative. And you have to trade through someone who owns a seat on the exchange. And it's a remarkable fact that no derivatives exchange in modern history has failed. They have weathered so far every financial storm. And Williams here in this paper, it's not a well-known paper. I found it in deep archival research, but it's very fascinating. And it sort of flipped my own understanding of the history of the development of these markets. And he lends some color to this development. And he points out a really interesting case about a forward market for flour and breadstuffs between Buffalo and New York City in the 1840s. This is well before the Chicago markets, which we've always thought were the birthplace of modern derivatives markets. And In particular, he points to a case in 1847 where there was a late thaw and the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes didn't open up until late spring. And because of that, people who had forward traded flour and breadstuffs to New York City from Buffalo couldn't make their deliveries. And so they failed in their forward contracts. And the remarkable aspect is all of the entities settled up financially without redress to the legal system. And so we're in an institutional setting where contracts and the surrounding system is really powerful in guiding cooperative behavior and dealing with risk and risk transfer. In particular, he points out a case of highly developed contracts, settlement procedures, and other practices that guided this early forward market. We basically had everything that a modern futures exchange has except for the central counterparty. And so it was a small step from here to the central counterparties and the banking function that they provide to a modern futures exchange. And it really sort of is a powerful historical example of institutions working powerfully. And with that, I want to take you to one of my favorite examples of really powerful institutions. This is a fascinating paper by Richard Roll, a financial economist. The story goes is that he was attending a conference in Florida and went on a tour of an orange grove. And it turns out that 98% of orange juice is produced geographically in this one central region of Florida. And so he got the brilliant idea that if weather ever were to be detected in having an influence on prices, surely it would be here. And it turns out that there are frozen orange juice concentrate futures contracts that trade on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And he collected high-quality weather data for this area of Central Florida, thinking that demand for orange juice is going to be pretty stable over time, so that it's got to be the supply that's going to drive any price changes. Pretty rational assumption, I think. But when he went to fit his model, for the nerds out there, it was a bivariate vector error correction model. When he went to fit this, he found that the weather data didn't predict futures prices at all. But this was super counterintuitive because the story is obvious about why weather should influence the price. We can all tell it. If the supply is low, price is going to be high, and vice versa. And that can be driven by the weather. But then he remembered his Hayek. And what he got thinking was perhaps people who are trading in these contracts and in the local markets already have forward-looking expectations about weather and how that will influence the price, and they've traded on it. And in fact, that was the case. So even though the coefficients in the model for weather were insignificant, he then got the brilliant idea of flipping the prediction. And it's astonishing. Orange juice futures prices predicted weather data better than the best climate models at the time. So what do orange juice futures traders know that even geophysicists don't? And that's the power of institutions working properly. And this is what Hayek meant by the power of the price mechanism guiding behavior. And so I want to think about, like, what are the institutions that can guide data quality? And so I have from this idea from economics a challenge to entrepreneurs in this space. What are the knowledge problems? What are the coordination problems? And how can we identify them and then begin to think about them rooted in this kind of history and theory? And perhaps you've seen this white paper with the unfortunate title. I very much agree with the diagnosis of the problem. I am an outsider, but I think I got enough of an understanding of your industry to see clearly what some of the problems are. But I strongly disagree with the idea that this is a market failure due to a tragedy of the commons problems. That's too much of an allocationist paradigm for me and not a catalactic paradigm. And the reason is a humane data science requires proper exchange relationships. And the market for human attention and services is not a market for natural resources that are overexploited. The proper market is a labor market. And so to have some economic ideas to guide us, I think can be very helpful. And perhaps there's been some muddle or some confusion about that. And so the question I want to naively ask is, what is the incomplete set of contracts and the properly structured institutions to deal with and cope with these knowledge problems and coordination problems? And then thinking about this perspective to support a new engineering discipline that's human-centric, and tying this back to our GOAT, Michael Jordan, how can intelligence augmentation and intelligent infrastructure help fill out these missing contracts and these institutional arrangements? So here's some implications, I think, that might be helpful for this reframing. Under the market failure paradigm, we're going to be thinking about preserving a resource pool of participants as a natural resource. And the problem is one of overexploitation, just like a field may be overgrazed by cattle. If it's a public resource, everyone can graze, therefore it'll be overgrazed. That's the tragedy of the commons. I don't think that's what's going on here. What might be the policy recommendation if that's your paradigm? It might be some kind of regulatory mandate or some kind of voluntary restrictions and access to usage. And the idea here is to think about participant burnout as a depletion of a finite resource rather than as a rational economic response to disengagement. Under the exchange or catalactic paradigm, this would be reframed, and you'd focus on fair compensation and working conditions, thinking about labor markets, and treat respondents as services of providers rather than a natural resource. And building out the institutional structures that formalize that relationship. And then finally, establishing professional standards and governance procedures to help monitor quality. So with that, I thank you and appreciate being here with you at SampleCon.